my little bed. And it was a kid's bed with, railing around it. And I remember waking up, and around the bed with all these monster faces. And it happened quite often. And I never seemed to be able to rest at night because of these monster faces. And years later, I found out what these monster faces were. See, after my mother gave birth, the families would come by to see the baby, and usually it'd be at night, and I'd be asleep. So they'd get around the bed and look down at the baby in the bed, and all these faces would appear around the bed. And for years, I just could not get over the idea that there were monsters in the room. I was in retarded classes right after kindergarten, they put me, because I was hysterical most of the time, and I stuttered. And when anyone stuttered, I laughed at them. I was just out of whack. And went right through high school that way. It surprised me that I ended up as a class artist.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about that. I remember you showed me in your 1940 book there that you did some of the illustrations.
Oh yeah, and I did murals for the high school and the Times.
Wow.
You had some interesting classmates, as I remember when you were thumbing through that book.
Oh yeah. I don't know if that baseball player, whether that's the original guy or someone with the same name, but they did say in the book that he was well-known baseball player.
Joe DiMaggio, is that it?
Yeah, Joe DiMaggio. The guy offered me $100 for the book because it had his signature in it. It actually has to do with my mother. See, because everyone wants to know what kind of parents you had. Well, my mother was amazing, and my father was twice as amazing. He delivered newspapers and had another job turning champagne bottles. You know, you go up and turn. He was kind of not too much of a genius, you could tell. He was an ex-prize fighter, got his brains knocked out. And my mother, this is typical. I got the hell away from that family as fast as I could. When I got married, we just came across country. And so after my first divorce, I hadn't seen my parents for 15 years. I decided I wanted to renew myself with the family. So I went all the way to Brooklyn, 3 flights over the Jewish delicatessen, knocked on the door. My mother came to the door and looked at me, and I said, "I'm Lenny, your son." She looked and said, "You're too old to be Lenny," and slammed the door in my face. And I worked in New York I did Bonwitella windows. One particular one I remember is raising the flag on Iwo Jima, where I did life-size soldiers, you know, the scene with the flag. So I did in paper mache, because you didn't have the materials then that you had now. And I did paper mache elephants for fashion shows. And some of them were 20, 25 feet tall. And I don't know, there was all kinds of things that were very odd. There was a guy I worked for, he was called Man of Distinction, and a photographer. And he did all kinds of funny sets. And one was a medical set, I remember. And it had to do with, I forget the name of, well anyway, the scene was they were bathing horses in blood before they crossed the Alps, so arrows couldn't hurt them. See, so we had to set up a fake scene of bathing horses. The only trouble I was in charge of getting sets. And I was told that one of the horses had been delivered in the cellar, that I had to go and get the horse. Well, you know how much experience I had with horses. So I go down, there's a big elevator, and there's this huge horse. So I thought, being got union wages, that he was intelligent enough. I said to him, and they were all yelling at me to get him up on the scene because it cost a lot of money to have a scene like that going on, all the people involved. So I tried to get the horse into the elevator. No way. Talking didn't help. So I got behind him and tried to push him in the elevator. And while I was pushing him, I heard this snap on my back. I fell under him, and then he sat on me. And then another guy came down, and he knew what to do with the horse. What you do is actually put your hand in his jaw and just pull him into the elevator. And they left me. And there was no such thing as sick leaves or anything like that. So I called in a couple of days later when I could even use the phone. Had a hell of a time getting home. And I told him the problem I had, the man of distinction, a little Italian guy. And he said, "I'm sorry, I can't use you," and they fired me. But then I always had trouble with my back after that. So I got into a big firm, I can't remember the name. Working for them in New York helped me get a job with Welton Beckett to do architectural sculptures.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I got the whalebone jobs, and I was dying to get out of it. But when I was in New York, the Crawshaw Gallery, Antoinette Crawshaw, told me that if I made drawings of Army life, she had always had sold my drawings and things when I was a kid. She would sell them for me. So immediately I got catarrhal fever, and I was in bed for months, it seemed, about 2 months. And half the service there, well, men had this catarrhal fever, and it was just terrible. I don't know what it was, but it was terrible. And, well, anyway, I decided that I couldn't stay in bed any longer, and I was going to go out and do some drawings of Army life. So I took my pad, and it was Camp Peary, Virginia. It just started. There was mud up to here and along the roads. And finally I walked into this little night with high fever. And I noticed the barracks up front, big tin hut, and something was going on in there that was very noisy. So I decided it must be something I could draw there. And I had a nice white pad. I walked into the place, and before I knew it, they got a hold of me. What the problem was that one of the guys, they were fighting. One barracks was fighting another barracks, and each was represented by a prizefighter. And one prizefighter never showed up because he had that catarrhal fever. And the guy left was a little Italian guy, and got wide, and a real prizefighter. I was I could defend myself, but I wasn't exactly a professional. So I walked in with my white pad. The lieutenant said to the prizefighter, "Pick someone out of the audience to be your match." He sees the white pad. They take me, shove me into the ring with him, take my clothes off, and then he starts beating me up terribly. And but he's so much shorter than I was, so the only thing I could do was, New York style. I got him from the back, put my arm around his head, and just started scalping him. I had teeth then, and I just took his whole scalp off, and the blood was running down like crazy. And then they put me in a psychiatric ward, and then a southern psychiatrist said, I remember him saying, "That's not the American way of fighting, boy," and things like that, which didn't bother me one bit. And eventually they decided that they would just get rid of me. And then I worried about being put in the army. To begin with, when we were in New York, you know, I didn't tell you much about my first wife and myself, but we lived under the Brooklyn Bridge in a house that had 3 floors. It was like a factory. And a sculptor rented it to us. And actually I was paying the rent. And then we had Nan's close friend, a woman named Blossom Plum, the most gorgeous little blonde you ever saw in your life. She'd lie under a sheet and you'd see there'd be a line here where she washed herself from here up, and you can tell from here down her look. And I never understood, but her boyfriend, who we lived with, was Marlon Brando.
Wow.
See? And that was a scene, because everyone expects some brilliance from this guy. And all he did was have followers from the New School of Social Research, where they were studying how to be actors. And all he did all day long, when he was around, was go like this. See? Then look at me and say, "Yeah, crazy." That's all he ever said. Year and a half at least. Then when we went to bed, the 2 of them were facing this way and the 2 of us were facing this way. And then we were on the top floor, because all his friends and God knows all the people that showed up. I mean, it was, in fact, a disaster happened. That we were having a party, and the Ranson thing, and there was a whole bunch of so-called actors and God knows what, kids down in the cellar with the big pipes, and they all decided they'd swing on the pipe. Finally, I got sick and tired of New York, and I looked at all the art in New York, and it wasn't my kind of art by any means. So I decided I wanted to fish like I did when I was a kid. And out here was the ocean. And then I found out that they were making pottery pieces in Laguna. And I had done almost anything you could think of. I had decorated porcelains, I had done everything in the world. And so I called up a place called Dick Knox, I remember. And they did the most terrible porcelains you would ever see. You know, Black Panthers with gold around their necks and all this terrible stuff. So they hired me over the phone, and then took quite a while. We had to cross the country, and we got just, and I think I told you, enough to buy tickets on the bus or overcoats in New York. So we got tickets on the bus, and I left. God, I was sick when I left. I left with a heavy-duty flu, and then I had to do watercolors of landscapes to pay for the parts of the trip that we need to eat. And I remember my eyes were practically gone, and then we hit around Santa Fe, and we were on the bus, and my wife had to go to the bathroom, so she got off the bus, and I was sitting there, and then 2, like I said, cops came by, and were going from person to person, and I was wearing a sort of corduroy coat that didn't look American, and I'd say to one person, "Where were you born? Where were you born?" And they were looking for refugees coming in. And I was so out of it. Well, finally they got to me. They asked me, where did I come from? Where was I born? And all I could say was, Jewish. And they thought I was a refugee. But I found myself making drawings of these old castles, which my mother kept and sent me, which has amazed me, because she had no consideration she and my father finally decided, and I wasn't any more than 15, to take me to their lawyer to talk me out of art. See? And this guy started talking to me about going into plastics, this and that. And very curiously, years later, I did some of the biggest plastic jobs in the world. I got pictures of them in one of my books over there. If you look, you'll see invented ways of working polyester resin that no one ever used before. And I had a lot of trouble delivering them. And, I tried to get them on trains to go across to St. Louis, where I was installing them into this Six Bear and Fuller store, and there was, well, you could read about it because it was written all over the place. There was like, I forget how many thousands of feet. And then I made a merry-go-round out of polyester resin horses. Usually sons and fathers have trouble, they're competitive, but I haven't noticed anything like that. We're so different. I mean, we're really different because maybe he resembles his mother more. And people get angry with me because I help him quite a bit. And he's a musician. He has a family. He never got married, but he has a son. And this woman, and I could show you what this woman looked like. She was my model. Never went near her because I knew she was trouble. She was Mexican, beautiful Mexican woman who was actually a New York model, clothes model. And she also painted to some degree and things like that. And I warned him about her, and he got her pregnant. She was so desperate to have a child because she was getting older, you know, in her late 30s, early 40s. And then he found himself, you know, with sort of a wife. And she never wanted to work or do anything like that. She figured she was a mother. And she had planned the whole thing where I would support them and she would be with the young man. So I did for years, supported both of them, till I just couldn't do it anymore. And I really loved my son, you know, he's a blood member, you mentioned it. And I never can tell what he thinks of me.
One of the most remarkable stories is the whalebone story. I don't know how much of it you uncovered, but the whole whale story about hunting for the whales, the dead whales, and discovering them, locating them in a bay in Mexico, and the weeks, months, however long it took him to discover the whales, then to approach the whales, which smelled horrendously, being dead and washed up on shore, and then to go about the process of getting the whale bones, mainly the ribs, and getting them somewhat clean, transporting them back to the United States. It's just a remarkable and hysterical story. Finally getting them back to Laguna Beach and having to go to read Moby Dick to find out what to do with the whale bones to get them in a condition where he could work with them. A very long story, very funny story, but ended up he created quite a masterpiece at the Hilton Hotel where it hung for many years until, as Lenny put it, some drunk just grabbed on it like some chandelier and broke it, and I don't know what happened to it after that. But he's done some phenomenal whalebone sculptures. One piece that he did, you probably saw, he has in his house, was in the LA Museum for quite a while.
Tell us some about the whale bones.
Oh, that. Then there's a museum guy. It's written up. What's the name? I can't remember anything. That's the problem. So he started a very important museum, and he bought a bunch of my drawings and stuff.
Mm.
And then I had made some things for a woman who didn't pay me for these plastic things I made, drawings inside plastic that are supposed to hang in her house. So I put them in the festival. Well, someone who I worked with in New York doing the Bonwatello windows, this little gay guy, Jimmy McQuay, ran a department for Welton Beckett. That was one of the biggest. They decorated and built hotels all over the world. And he suggested that I go to this meeting for this new Hilton hotel. And I didn't even drive then. So I remember getting in a car, and I tried to make it go forward instead of backwards and things like that. It took me 6 hours to reach the place where this meeting was being held about decorating the new Hilton. And it was in it was a company that building, because I met Welton Beckett. In fact, his son, Welton Beckett, is in town, had a little antique shop and does some architectural things. Very minor guy. I was surprised because Welton Beckett was a big number. And so I sat at the meeting, and for some reason or other, they mentioned the Nordic room, for instance. And so I opened my big mouth, and next thing I know, I have the job. I tell them it's going to be done in whalebone. And no one had even heard of that. Neither did I. In fact, I had so much trouble getting whalebone to work with that the Bowers Museum wasn't a museum, it just was a pile of all kinds of crap. And in one of their cellars was all the bones of a dead whale. And I remember I paid guys $50 to steal it. But when I brought it over, it was so old and decrepit, it just broke in my hands. And then the hunt began. I started out for Scammons Bay in Baja, and I never could find it. And this guy I hired, and there was two guys. One guy was very wealthy, and he lent us his truck. He was starting to get in on the situation because he knew that it was kind of exciting, hunting whales. And so there were no roads down there then, and the truck broke down near this village, and these were the goddamnedest Mexicans you ever saw. They were big people, blonde, some of them, and the woman, the matriarch, ran the whole town, and it was very strange. One guy stopped making passes at some girl, and turns out that she's living with her brother, and the brother was going to kill him. And this is where my art saved everything. I started making drawings of all the people in town and giving them the drawings. And I remember some old lady made a drawing of me that was kind of marvelous. It's not a portrait, but it was, and finally they fixed the truck for us. And I gave them everything we had, and we headed back home. This time I wasn't looking for Scammons Bay. She's waving at me. And so I heard of whales in La Paz, and that's all the way to the hell the tip of Mexico. But I didn't know that particular time of the year you couldn't even be there because there were so many bugs, mosquitoes, and things that bit the hell out of you. So we went anyway, and God, we were killed. But we got a fisherman in his boat, and somewhere in there there's a picture of us getting the whales, and this schmuck, I gave him a camera, and he forgot to turn the thing so everything was double exposure and useless, and you only have one picture, but it's a kid with one of the whale bones acoustic his brother or something in the background, and I couldn't use it.
Oh.
But it had more write-ups than you could ever believe for about 20 years. And then some schmuck climbed up on it, drunk, and broke the hell out of the whalebone. I couldn't, the guy who works for me, to get the whalebones. Okay, we managed to get them out of the whales. But coming home, we had a lot of trouble. I had gone to the Mexican government, their office, and they said I could take the whalebones out of the country.
Mm-hmm.
But when I got to the border with this huge amount, he locked in. Well, anyway, all these whales, all these guys came out of the bushes practically, and told us that we couldn't take it out for 2-3 weeks. And I stood on the fender, like I looked at the fender of your car last night, and I thought to myself, this is exactly what I had. The little fender I stood on, and this guy drive. I said, don't stop unless you see someone with a gun. And I started on the fender, and I said, who gets the money? Who gets the money? But just after she left me, the most recent thing I heard, what was it? I think it was 4 years ago. 2 wives showed up. My first wife said to me that she wants to come down, and I think I told you about, let's talk about all the good times we had together. And I told her, I don't remember any, but she came down anyway, and I told you what she said. She wanted to tell me that if I had a job like every other man, we'd still be together. And Evelyn, my second wife, borrowed $1,000 and never paid me back. All you think about is money. And she waited a minute and she says, can I borrow another $1,000? It's the last time I heard of it.
Once when I was talking to him in his home, which is very much like stepping into a museum, he stopped and got serious and he said, listen, my friend, everything you're looking at in this house has been made by someone's hands. And I thought that was a powerful, powerful statement in this time of technology and computers, the coldness of it all. And Lenny throws us back to the warmth of using your hands to create whatever it is, create something with your own hands.
And then the one thing I did that no artist ever does, because it leads to trouble, is to draw with the students. While they were drawing, I was drawing. And they could watch me make a drawing. And then after the class, I'd always give someone the drawing I made. And they were thrilled with it. And yet these teachers, it was always very flattering for me to be a teacher, because I did very well at it. Because I had troubles, becoming an artist myself, being self-taught. I could tell them what I did to be able to do the things I do. And it made life interesting.
So you are really, but didn't you go to art school in New York?
1 month. Yeah, with Reginald Marsh, who's a very well-known draftsman, painter. He did realistic things, and he did subway scenes, but they were more or less using old master techniques where he did underpainting, glazed, and he called me the little Jew boy who drew like an old master. He tried to be a tough guy, but he came from a wealthy family and things. Instead of going to school, I used to end up at the museum of Natural History, and I think that's where I got to know a lot of stuff, even though I wasn't particularly going there to learn anything. It was just a natural thing for me to learn, because I'd go through them and through the various memorized stuff, and it sticks with you.
So what kind of things did the Smithsonian request from you as a part of?
All the photographs I had of early work. They don't have any of the newer work. done in the last 20 years. And then the Smithsonian just wrecked. They sent back, I found an envelope with photographs of literally 50 or 60 drawings, and you can only see vague imprints of
This is
half of
the
them.
walk down memory lane, Lenny. This is definitely a mind blower. When I met Cayce at the party and he said he was doing a film of Leonard Kaplan, I just gasped for air because I was recalling 2 weeks ago on a walk the pictures that you did of me in 1966, and I was wondering whatever happened to those pictures. Those were Conte crayon with red, black ink washes that Lenny sloshed on top, and then the peacock feathers and the other feathers were covering up part of the nude so you could hardly see you. But I remembered how honored I was to model for you, and I had just this tremendous respect for your artwork. But I guess the very first remembrance of you, Lenny, was in 1964, 65, when Candy Smith was modeling for you. And we were both modeling at the Art Center out in the canyon. If you remember Candy Smith, we lived on Graceland Street around the corner when you lived up above the antique store. And Candy and I used to come over and visit you. And I'm showing an old photograph to Cayce here because obviously if you look at me now, you'll go, who is that person? I was 35 years younger, I had long brown hair, and so did Candy, and we both modeled, and I think we both modeled at the same time once for you. So please get out all those wonderful Conte crayon and ink wash nudes that you have stored away somewhere, and let us see them again, because we love to see them.
One woman left me because she watched me work and I was rubbing a drawing in Conte, red Conte, and it got redder and redder and redder, and I realized I was painting with my own blood. That did a red choice llama. In the beginning, I was the only young person in town here. And that didn't seem bad, except as supposedly an artist, even then, all the other artists belonged to the Art Association, and they were all seascape painters who disliked anything but seascapes, and I did figurative things and stuff like that. And I wasn't accepted. I couldn't even go near that place. That was supposedly the art gallery then. Years later, it became a museum, but they claim that it's been a museum for about 80-something years. And I know, because I was there when they were voting to make it a museum instead of an art association. And it turned out it was 1973, and the new group who made it a museum, I wasn't that accepted either, because they were all, I don't know, commercial artists, and also the so-called the modern period and my stuff. I can't place it anywhere. It's the past means a lot to me, and the people I like are in the past. I never did well with this century at all.
And that was Laguna Museum. Laguna
Yeah, the local museum. In fact, if I ever went there when it was the Art Association, two guys would show up and just throw me out. Yeah, bad news. And eventually, they had a new curator who told me to bring some work around, and so I could become a member. And I did, and it wasn't accepted, and it was left out in the hallway for me to pick it up. And some woman saw it and bought it, and they demanded a percentage. and I didn't belong to the art association. So somewhere in this bunch of books, there's letters from her saying how much she enjoyed the painting and this and that.
Who were some of your favorite artists, Lenny? I mean, in history.
Oh, there's a guy named Arcimboldo, who's a 16th century painter. And he might have even been a student of Leonardo da Vinci. And he made things that were acceptable at the time.
I really respect him for his uniqueness. He's carved out a very unique niche in life. He's not your typical artist, as you know. He's more famous for his collecting. Nevertheless, his art, I think, is exquisite. I love his art. He has worked in a variety of media. His role model, or one of his role models in art, was Arcimboldo, who, I don't know if you know, he was a former student of Leonardo da Vinci's, a surrealist. So much of Lenny's passion shows up in his surrealistic work. He defines art as a way for an artist or for an individual to differentiate himself from the rest of the masses. And Lenny has certainly fulfilled that. He has differentiated himself, not just in art, but in life, where he's sort of achieved legendary proportions there in Laguna Beach with his reputation.
I'm Kent Kelly, and I live here in Laguna Beach and have a store on Coast Highway. And I've had one since I've come here since 1968. And I first met Leonard by just going into his shop. He had a shop called the Ancient Arts. Even though I've had a store here for 30 years, even now, if he buys something from me, I'm impressed, But of course, I always give him a good deal because that's the nature of Lenny. Always wants something good. I almost feel it's my obligation to give a deal. If I'm losing money, I'm going to sell something to Leonard because I feel he's like a Laguna icon treasure that's actually hidden. And one of the other things that's also very funny, when he had back injury, and he went to UCLA. They ended up putting some animal bones in his back, and a few months later, he asked the doctor, "Well, what kind of bones did you put in there?" And the doctor said, "Well, I put, pig bones." So that was very odd for him. He made a joke about that, to the fact that, of course, what's he going to do now when he dies and goes to heaven? He's going to find out he's not kosher because he has pig in his back, So, but like I said, it was always self-deprecating humor, and he'd make light of stuff like that.
And John Dempsey, he's a very famous cartoonist, Dempsey. He did things for Playboy and things like that. In fact, you see these?
If there was such a thing as a Picasso or somebody of that scale in Laguna Beach that exists, it's hard to believe that he isn't held on a pedestal and marched through the streets as somebody. But that's just the way he lives his lifestyle. He's very unassuming, and he doesn't have a very big ego, and he has self-deprecating humor, which is kind of interesting. He always comes up with stories that old anecdotes about Laguna and this and that. And one thing I always remember, he was telling me the story when he first came to Laguna and went to his first art opening. He walked into the place and just automatically signed this book, which was a petition, which he didn't even bother to read. And his friend took him aside and go, "Leonard, why'd you sign that?" And he goes, "Well, everybody was signing." He goes, "Did you read it?" And he goes, "No, I didn't read it." He goes, "Well, look what it says. It says, I, as an artist in Laguna Beach, agree not to show in any gallery that shows Jewish represented art in this community." And, well, of course, his name's Leonard Kaplan, and, he just left it off. And
As far as the Festival of Arts, the pageant, you see, which is back there, had nothing to do with the booths. I did the backdrops for that festival, for the pageant of the Masters.
I guess it was close to 30 years ago.
Yeah.
I had been teaching at Cal State Fullerton, and my period of time or stay there was over, and I was trying to find something to make a living on because I had 2 kids at the time and a very nice wife. So I was just looking for something that I could do at a period. my tenure was being considered over the summer, so I didn't have a job. They had given me a job for the summer, which left me without funds. And so I decided to start doing pre-Columbian. And it worked out beautifully. In fact, the first time I went, I had met this guy once before. The second time, actually. Because the first time I met him, I bought a couple of things from him. His name was Manuel Arce Rojas in Guadalajara. And the second time I saw him, he had this whole room full of pre-Columbian. And I guess they had been pressing him greatly because of his, I think he was a gambler, and I think he got in trouble. And so they had pressed him to the point where he said, I'll give you all of this art for $1,000. So I said, start bagging it up, and we bagged it up, and I brought it home. Well, I sold an enormous amount of the stuff, and then I still had about 300 pieces. And I came to Leonard. I was told by my sister-in-law who lived here that there was this gentleman who had a shop. So I came in and knocked on the door, and of course they said, well, he's upstairs. So I walked up and knocked on that door, and he said, come in. He and his wife were sitting there, and he was flat on his back. And I said, are you interested in pre-Columbian? He said, sure, bring it on up. Well, I had 60 some odd pieces, which I spent like, and then, I'm going to take, it's going to take me 40 trips to get these pieces up there. And he's going to say, oh, I want one piece. Don't worry, that's it. So, like I said, I went up and laid it out on the floor, and I said, I was waiting for him to say something. He said, well, how much for everything? I started coming to Leonard, and then after, I think about the third time, I said, well, I'll just bring everything to you first. And from then on, I brought everything to Leonard first.
I sold it.
Yeah, and we had everything from 36-inch chinescos to little tiny necklaces with 16, 18 pieces of clay figures that were strung in there. I mean, everything. We got everything for the longest time.
These are like over 1,000 years old.
I had a couple of art galleries in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I used to trade with Lenny a lot. I'd bring things out here from New Mexico, American Indian things and pre-Columbian and other things. And Lenny was one of my main contacts. I remember, a number of stories, but I remember at one time, maybe Lenny can tell you a little more about this, but he had a robbery here. And he was very proud because the robbers chose to steal some of his paintings, and he felt very flattered by this. And it was a little different situation. Had a good eye for things, and so he was a good contact for me because he had real good taste. And so many of the dealers had a lot of stuff, but not very good taste, so the quality wasn't great. And I was interested in quality things permanently.
And I bought pockets full of gold necklaces from Panama, pre-Columbian gold.
Well,
And then I got on a plane, and then coming home was a problem because I had, the barrels of Columbian with me that we traded for. How many barrels?
33.
33 barrels.
And even though we had complete papers, there would have been tremendous amount of time at the airport. And when we came to go to the airport, Leonard handled it in his wonderful way.
I couldn't move. My back went, and I had taken so much Valium by then. I couldn't. So the cop, or the border guy, came up to me and he looked down at me and he says, "What do you got to declare?" So I told him, I said, "My pockets are full of gold and I have 33 barrels of pre-Columbian." And he looked and laughed and said, "Push this guy through." There were several threatening times when everyone knew that the world was coming to an end, and I had a shop. I put out a big sign outside my shop, and the world was supposed to end that day. So I put a sign out that said, "End of the world sale." But unfortunately, the world didn't end and no customers showed up.
See, the first time I met Lenny Kaplan was 3 or 4 years ago when he came into my office with his soon-to-be wife, Joanne, and he was ill in some way with some sort of respiratory problem. He told me that his name was Leonard Kaplan, BC, bar mitzvahed and circumcised. So, he's a unique man. He has definite passion for life and for art. And I really respect him and love him for how he has fulfilled his potential for goodness in this world. Say, as his physician over the past few years, one sort of interesting and sad thing was when I saw him this past year, and he again came in for some respiratory problems. We took a chest x-ray and saw something quite suspicious on the film. Turned out to be a cancer, which was resectable and ended up going to UCLA and having it cut out. And even though he described his caretakers at the hospital as a gangster mafia group, they ultimately took care of him and cured him from his cancer. Lenny is a good cook, and he just has an absolute lust for life and terribly enjoys people. Enjoys life, enjoys living as much as he enjoys art. And as he said recently, I'll be sad when I leave this place. His sense of humor is phenomenal. He's like a mix between Walter Matthau and Woody Allen in his way.
Mm-hmm.
And his observations in life and art and people, somewhat cynical, always funny, very amusing guy.
My name's Angela Aldatz. I live here in town in Laguna Beach. I've been a resident here for about 5 years now. I've had the pleasure of meeting Leonard. About 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago, I work in a store in town that some friends own, and he's been a regular there for about 3 of the 4 days that I'm there. He's a character. He's quite a character. He's funny. He's funny as hell. He's always got a good joke to tell. He comes in and just charms the pants off of anyone who happens to be in the store. And when customers are lucky enough to talk with him, as we've been lucky enough to talk with him, they get the same kind of feel. And I've narrowed it down to a few, maybe a handful of people where I consider good people and real people, and he's in there. Lenny's in there.
Excellent.
He's one of the top 10 for sure.
Excellent.
Just wish him the best, always. And I'm thankful that I've had the chance to meet him and share his stories and learn about him and be a part of this. I'm very thankful for that.
Thinking about thinking, but never getting around to think, I don't dare. Because when you're around 80, what are you going to think of? You don't know where you came from, you don't know where you're going. So anything you think of is a sort of fantasy level. So if you want to fool around with that, you do. So most of the time my drawings are a fantasy. Because any fantasy I put on paper, my business was a reality. So I had to be very careful with that. Because that's realism. And I managed both. And here I sit alive still. I shave every day. It's a nice habit to have. It doesn't shave very well, but I found out after you die, your beard keeps growing. So I figured I'd need a very good razor, electric razor, so that I can leave the grave every once in a while and shave, and then put it back in its box and go back and lie in my grave again until my beard grows again. Because I never wanted to look like a rabbi.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I look exactly like a rabbi if I had a beard. And I'm not a very important, just a persistent one.